We left this recording of our favourite shows of 2024 very late in the day so that you could get to Theatre Royal Drury Lane to see The Tempest. And you now have.
I now have. And to be honest, we might as well have not bothered in terms of favourites of the year. It was really disappointing. Jamie Lloyd's production, Signori Weaver. Earlier in the year, Jamie Lloyd had done a Romeo and Juliet with Tom Holland, which I had really liked.
You came out to bat for it.
I did come out to bat for it, and I thought it worked. I thought it had many strengths. Something has gone wrong with The Tempest, which you will be able to read about in my review, but it just seems willfully difficult, actually, and dark and hard to understand. So I was really disappointed. There are nice things. It looks great. And Mason, who has been on the podcast, is brilliant as Ariel. I mean, that is a perfect piece of casting. But, yeah, on the whole, it was really sad. I always wanted to love something, and it was my penultimate show of the year, and I didn't love it. So.
Well, we can move on to slightly more positive things from now on, hopefully.
First we should say welcome to this week's episode of the What's on Stage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
And we're going to go through our favourite shows of the year, which has been quite a year. As usual, I just found it really, really hard to make this list. We've gone for top fives. Nearly killed me.
I would say nothing has really soared into the stratosphere, but there have been lots of very, very good productions. So it's almost like a plateau of high quality, I'd say, rather than something that I would turn back to anyone who asked me and said, this is the only show that I've really adored this year.
And I think going through, for me, I found a bit short of new plays. Didn't see James Graham's Punch, which was on in Nottingham this year and is coming to London next year. And that would obviously been a contender for Best Play. And Giant at the Royal Court by Mark Rosenblatt, which was terrific. In the end, didn't quite make my list. So I have felt slightly new drama has struggled this year, which I suspect is a pipeline issue that, things come in at different moments. But yeah, a good year overall. What's your first choice? We're going to do top fives and we're going to start, I think, having much discussion at the bottom of the five. So what's your fifth favourite?
I'm going to start with a show that saw me driving down to Chichester for Matthew Bourne's take on Oliver. Which I'd never... I had seen, as I think I've mentioned, at the Birmingham Alexandra Theatre many, many moons ago. I think it's been a big year for musical revivals. We've had Hello Dolly, Starlight Express, the big just knowing what needs to be done and doing it very well kind of productions. And I think this is the best of that lot. I love the casting. I love Chichester. I love the creative team. I thought the costume design was also really spectacular.
Yes, Les Brotherston again.
One of the best in the world. And what Les actually does with the character of Bill Sikes by having his costumes echo Fagin's gang is that it shows that actually Bill Sikes is just one of Fagin's gang that's grown up, and it's almost a cautionary tale. And I thought that was a really fascinating introduction to the idea of toxic masculinity within Oliver that actually I don't think is brought out too often. So yeah, that for me was my great starting point, and I can't wait for that to sort of be a bedfellow to Les Mis in the West End, because I think the two of them together will go really well. And
I only saw its first preview, so I'm seeing it again, and in fact reviewing it when it comes to the Gielgud at the end of the month. The January opening, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. I thought it was wonderful, and I love the way it had gone back to a slightly smaller show, poor theatre origins, good storytelling, amazing choreography because Matthew Bourne, and terrific show, much liked.
What's coming in at your number 5?
My number 5, I'm cheating as usual. So it has been undoubtedly a year of Greek tragedies being rethought and revived on our stages. And two of the very best opened towards the end of the year with Alexander Zeldin's The Other Place, which is his version of the Antigone story with Emma Darcy and Tobias Menzies. And then Robert Icke brought his Oedipus with Mark Strong as Oedipus and Leslie Manville as Jocasta. And I think if you actually put me over torture instrument. I might just say that I thought The Other Place was the one I liked better, partly because the rethinking was so radical and it made it a story of a family in a way that I was surprised by. But I love that Oedipus, so I can't really separate them. I think they both had the virtue of making us absolutely understand why Greek tragedy matters, why those plays are still performed, and also of seeing that suffering that underpins Greek tragedy, of the grief and the sense of loss and how ambition's undermined. And they were staggeringly good productions.
We have just dedicated an episode of the podcast talking about them both because they ran concurrently as well, which I think added to the magic that they were both on simultaneously. Yes, I totally agree. I never saw The Other Place, but I absolutely adored Oedipus. Yeah, I know.
I mean, it was devastating, Oedipus. And the final scene of Oedipus, when, your caster gradually realises what's happened, I thought was unbelievable. Perhaps the single most devastating feeling. So that you actually, while watching the play, you move from this image of Mark Strong as a confident, swaggering politician on the verge of massive popular victory to a man curled up on a stage like a fetus. And completely stripped of every ounce of anything he thought he knew. And it was a really devastating trajectory. Interestingly, I felt sad indictment to British theatre in the sense that both Ike and Alexander Zeldin have been working abroad. They've come back to put plays on in Britain. They have both been working abroad, and I had that sense of feeling that I was missing a lot. Though I think Zeldin is going to come back. Definitely. So that's good.
He seems to have a home at the National Theatre.
I think so. I think the National love him. So, what's your fourth?
Number 4, then, I've got The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was on at Theatre Royal Haymarket. Kit Williams' adaptation of Oscar Wilde's novella about a aristocrat who doesn't age, and instead a portrait of them ages. Everyone knows the kind of conceit there, but Sarah Snook, now catapulted to international acclaim thanks to Succession, plays all the characters. So there was some branding of it as a solo show, but thanks to the huge team of camera operators and makeup artists and costume designers and everyone else that surrounds her, it isn't really a solo show. She's part of an ensemble of about 14 other individuals and artists, but she just happens to be the one that's delivering the lines either through pre-recorded video or on-stage video. And there are times in that show that you can even tell if you're watching something that had been live or pre-recorded, before previews had started. I think that it's quite a well-worn topic, extravagance and narcissism and the vanity of social media that this all taps into. But I think what really worked here was the addition of the video, because to actually show someone go through the process of exploring their own vanity through a mobile device, for example, feels kind of pertinent. I don't think we've seen it done with such technical flair. We've seen some fantastic video on stage, but I think that this, for me, felt like the bells and whistles could be bells and whistles, and that didn't need to be apologised for. They could just go as extravagant as they wanted to.
Yeah, it was extravagant. It's
yes.
Exactly the way.
You were less sold on it,
you were dazzled by it. And I thought the cleverness of it, the deep cleverness, was that it really did seem like a picture of Dorian Gray for the TikTok generation. I love the bits where on stage she manipulated her own image on her iPhone and used the modifiers that TikTok users use, changing her face and so on. And I thought that was the cleverness. I was slightly less sold on it than you were, because I thought it had a hard heart and that there was a sense in which the cleverness of it missed the tragedy of the character. But I did come out of it feeling exhilarated by how clever it was. And Sarah Snook, definitely one of the performances of the year. I mean, not just she was amazing because she did all the technological stuff, but you did feel she had such a sense of herself as a character as well.
She's also a wonder to interview, because we interviewed her at the Olivier's, and you could, when you're on the press line holding your Olivier, you can be as aloof as you want and no one cares, but she was the most grounded, funny, earnest individual. Wasn't repeating the same lines to every single camera crew, but actually giving well-wrought amusing answers that you could then sort of like watch back and enjoy. So big win for her. She's definitely top 5 interviewee of the year.
Yes, well, that's a very big tick. I'm all for that.
And what's in at your number 4 then?
My number 4 is Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett, revived, directed by James MacDonald, starring Ben Whishaw, Lucien Massamati, Jonathan Slinger and Tom Eden. An amazing cast. In a production that changed my view of the play. It's interesting, this one, because I walked out of that Waiting for Godot thinking everybody's going to say this is the best version of the play they've ever seen. And some people felt that, but a lot of people didn't. It has, in critical terms, it's been an interesting year because a lot of plays have attracted a huge range of opinion. So the other thing we waited to see this week was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which ranged from 5 stars and an absolute rave for Time Out to me somewhere in the middle on a 3-star, hugely intelligent, hugely enjoyed it, slightly missed it, to some quite negative reviews, less than 3 stars. So, and Waiting for Godot was like that, as I remember it. What I loved about it was that I thought James MacDonald did the play the great favour of saying, let's not treat it as a classic. Let's not treat it as a play that changed theatre. Let's just start here and see what happens. And his direction was so sensitive, so quiet, and yet very, very taut, that I thought he pulled out the balance that there is in the play between the tragedy of these men waiting and their endurance. And I thought it was incredibly poised and moving and revelatory for me.
Interesting. Yeah, and great cast as well.
Brilliant cast. I mean, brilliant. And what also about it, sorry, I'm going on, but what was also extraordinary about it was that Ben Whishaw couldn't have been as brilliant as he was without Lucien Massamati. They were absolutely a double act. They didn't play it as a double act like Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen did. They played it as 2 very contrasting characters. And yet it was in the contrast that they found the depth of their characters. And yeah, they'd in my Actor of the Year list, both of them. So what's your number 3? Da-da-da.
We've actually both been pushing for this one. We had to have a standoff as to who gets
this
to
is
talk
what
about
you
it.
stole from me.
We were at the foyer of the Almeida on Wednesday night and you were like, fine, you have it. But I'm sure you've got plenty of lovely things to say. Anyway, I've gone with Regent's Park Open Air Theatre's production of Fiddler on the Roof, which, if you'd told me at the start of the year that this was going to make my top 5, I would have been surprised, because I've seen a fair few Fiddlers and I honestly don't feel like it's a show that there is much more that I can get from it every time I see it. But then I always surprise myself that actually there is loads to this show and it's something that I could always rewatch. I think I just need to learn that as something that I'll always enjoy. You saw it on press night, didn't you, I think, from memory? I
did see it on press night and had the same reaction, because I slightly dragged my feet, as I recall, about going to see another Fiddler, because I'd love the Trevor Nunn in the Menier Chocolate Factory. And like you, I always think it's not a show I love. It's not a show I play. It's not something I feel very strongly about. I thought the production was just exceptional. And Tom Scott's set would probably be my favourite set of the year, because he used the open air space so amazingly and created this, it was like a giant ski jump with corn on the top. And so when they were walking through the fields, they were walking on this roof. And it changed the idea of the roof metaphorically, and it made it their lives, the Fiddler on the Roof, somehow. It also did an astonishing thing with the music at the end. So it combined a fiddler and a clarinetist. And as the daughter left, she played music as well as with the fiddler. And that was just incredibly emotional moment.
I think is it Jordan Fine who directed, who also worked with Daniel Fish at the Young Vic when his Sexy Oklahoma came over. So you'd expect something typically revisionist from it, but I think in a way it was very loyal to the original material. There were slight anachronisms with the costume also by Tom Scott, but for the most part it just knew that the material could hold up and feel resonant in the present day, which to some extent is quite sad that a story of latent and unpleasant persecution can feel so resonant.
Yes, it was another production that didn't force anything. I mean, it was like Waiting for Godot. And indeed, I can segue into my next one, unless you've got something else
I've got one final point to make, that because I saw it in late September when it was freezing cold from the off, as it gets when you're sitting around in Regent's Park, and it was dark outside from the very beginning. So you saw it with a beautiful sunset as the show
so they
continued.
timed, that's right. So for the press night, they had timed, and for the summer run, they had timed the show so that as you got to the wedding, you also got to the sunset. So when they sang Sunrise, Sunset, you were sitting in a sunset. It was magical.
And there's also something about the temperature in that once the temperature drops, it feels colder just as they're all having to disperse and leave Anatevka. And I think that actually they can use the outdoor space to make the audience feel those shivers as they have to leave the venue, knowing it's colder than when they went in. I think that's just a small aside, and also the wonder of outdoor theatre, that you can achieve something like that.
Yeah.
Hopefully by design, but maybe just a lovely coincidence.
This
for all
was
involved.
definitely by design, I think. So yes, it was brilliant. And returning to that idea of the simplicity of the direction, my third choice again is a cheat, because it's Dear Octopus and Love's Labour's Lost. Dear Octopus at the National Theatre, Dodie Smith. Love's Labour's Lost, first production of Tamara Harvey and Daniel Evans' new regime at the RSC. Absolutely beautifully directed in both cases by Emily Byrne, who I think is a director of such subtlety and lightness and delicacy. And again, is really willing to sit in the play and let the play reveal itself. I mean, I'm sure that's actually not how a directing process works, but that's what it feels like watching it. She just does things quietly. So Dear Octopus is a play that hasn't been much performed. It was a huge popular success at one time, but had been regarded as dated and baggy and melodramatic. And not much happened. Even when it was a success, people said not much happened. It's about a family gathering where many things do happen, but they're very small things. And it isn't a very good play because it opens with a large quantity of children being allowed long speeches on stage, which Dodie Smith must have thought was a brilliant idea in the 1940s, but really now doesn't work. But they got through that, and they got and they just allowed the drama to absorb you, because as the play goes on, it gets better and better and better. And it's really an examination of what family is. It meant a lot to my family. It meant a lot to my father, so I was moved to see it anyway. But I thought it was beautifully done, and I think the National was surprised by its success, because it's the only play this year I've seen twice. I didn't even review it, and I saw it twice. And a lot of people went back to it. I encountered a lot of people who had said they'd gone twice, and it's on NT Home now, and I really do recommend it to people. It will not change your world, but you will have a lovely, lovely time watching it. It's a very good ensemble piece led by Lindsay Duncan and Malcolm Sinclair, but it's got a brilliant performance as the young man, part played by John Gielgud, by Billy Howell. And really excellent.
It's been a very good year for Billy Howell, actually. He's one of the most exciting actors, I think.
Yes,
he's really coming up, because he was in the double bill at the Almeida, wasn't he? The Roots and Look Back in Anger.
Yeah.
2.0.
Yeah. So, it's been a good year for him. It's a good year. And Love's Labour's Lost, Luke Thompson announcing himself as a bankable stage star after his success in Bridgerton. And again, just lively and fun and light and clever. And, hats off. Good start to a new regime at the RSC, which has had a good year, a lot of which I haven't seen, so that's why it's not on my list.
Yeah, it's a very good year for the RSC, and we're likely to hear a bit more about the RSC next month. They've got their new season to announce, so even more fun to come.
Which will be very exciting. Yeah. So your number two.
Number two. So I've decided to orbit the idea of new musicals for this subject. Oh, pun intended. So I think it's been an okay year for new musicals. There was a lot of coverage around, this is a great year for British musicals. We had Two Strangers Carry a Cake Across New York, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Kathy and Stella Solve a Murder. So all these shows were very long titles. Although the one that I really enjoyed at the Edinburgh Fringe, that I really wasn't expecting to enjoy, and I've spoken about on the podcast before, was one-man musical, Flo and Jones parody of Andrew Lloyd Webber's career, which is having an extended run at the Underbelly Boulevard in London starting next month. So anyone who hasn't seen it in Edinburgh, they will now have a chance to revel in this satire. It's probably a strong word. Lampoon Andrew Lloyd Webber for all he's worth. And, I'm sure that he would also love watching himself on stage as well. But on the theme of very long titles in musicals, my number 2 pick is Natasha, Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which we saw together on Monday night and both completely adored.
Loved it.
Timothy Sheeder's first production that he is directing as the artistic director of the Donmar Warehouse. He was previously the artistic director at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre, so my first question to him on press night was, how does it feel having a roof to play with? And he said, it's great. Now I can drop giant pink teddy bears from the ceiling, which was a really fascinating moment in the show. And it's a production that's full of insight. And Timothy Sheeder never saw the original New York productions of the show.
I didn't know that.
So he was coming at it completely fresh. And he kind of turns it into a Muscovite melodrama where all the costumes are completely anachronistic. They feel like they could be something out of a Berlin nightclub in the late 1990s. But the music is incredibly rich in the way that it's got so many different strands to it. You've got EDM, you've got opera, you've got classic musical theatre, classical music, everything. There's one section in one of the numbers where you've got 2 of the leading cast members trying to sort of essentially do the opposite of harmonise, where they have to sing extended notes a single semitone apart, which is so impressively done. And it's a brilliant cast. I think, some of the best casting direction I've seen. And Chamisa Dawnford-May, who plays Natasha, is also another great rising star in the musical theatre world. She won a UK Theatre Award earlier this year, and she was also in Evita at Curve in Leicester, and she's due to star in Sondheim's final musical, Here We Are, at the National Theatre next year. So she is definitely one to watch.
And
I
she
know
is
that
sensational.
You love the show, if not as much, probably more than I did.
It's got the cleverest opening number I think I've heard in musical theatre for a really long time, of just that summarising War and Peace in a very funny saying that you must keep up, and just giving everybody a one-word description. So Anatole, hot. Natasha, young. It's brilliantly clever. And I love that. But what struck me about it is actually the power of the singing. That took me aback, because I knew that I liked the concept. I liked the idea of taking 70 pages out of one of the biggest novels. I like the music. As you say, it's so beautiful. But the quality was knockout. And I went with my niece, and she said she had no expectations. So she hadn't read about the New York stage show. She hadn't listened to it. She just happened to be free on a Monday night. And I said, well, I'd love to see you, and I've got a ticket for this. So that was the level of, expectation with which she turned up. And she too utterly adored it. Somebody put on Twitter, join the returns queue. It's fabulous. And I hope it has a wider life, because it feels very fresh and very smart and very emotional to me. I found it moving, and particularly the growth in Pierre, who starts off as this joke character and then ends up seeing the comet and realising the value of life and the value of change. It's great, really great.
Beautifully realised by Declan Bennett, worlds away from Josh Groban, who played the role on Broadway. And this production is so far from what that show was. That was very lavish sets, very period costumes, felt like it was something out of a BBC histodrama version of War and Peace, whereas this is so far beyond that, much to its credit. I really do hope it has a future life, and I think the glowing reviews should help it on its way. I just don't know where it would go, and
I know,
it might need a space.
Yeah.
It might need a space that's slightly less conventional, maybe somewhere like at Soho Place. If Nika Burns is listening, we can start the campaign.
Make it a hit.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So what's in at number 2 for you?
Well, interestingly, my niece Chiara said when we came out of Natasha, Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, that it's so lovely to go to the theatre and just have a good time. And I think there's some truth in that. There is great richness in that show, but it wears its richness lightly. And my second choice, which is Till the Stars Come Down by Beth Steele, was a very similar show. It was an invitation, as the publicity said, to the wedding of the year, which was a wedding in Nottingham with a dysfunctional family and everything going wrong. But it was also a wedding that I'm sure everybody recognises, wherever in the country they come from, whatever social class they are. These were people you knew. Everybody's had the aunt who turns up and takes over, and the bride who panics, and the secrets that are revealed, because of course weddings are that place. And what was brilliant about the play was that it contains the slow revelation of an absolutely destructive secret that eats away at relationships and at this family. And it was such a vivid portrayal of the way that happens in families. I mean, again, it's kind of a recognisable thing. It doesn't have to have happened to you for you not to realise that it can happen, and that the things people keep from each other, and misplaced love, and loving the wrong person and not being able to help yourself, or not loving the right person and not being able to help yourself, are things that we can all identify with. And I really thought that the Beth Steele play was just sensational in the way it explored that, and the way it took us out with a group of people that you could imagine being on the town with. So it stayed with me as well. Opened in January, and I've thought about it all year, which is a really good sign.
It's on National Theatre at Home as well, so I feel like National Theatre at Home is the patron saint of anyone who missed a show when it was on originally, but is unmissable as a show. Yes, it has been an incredibly good year for the National Theatre and cinemas, even re-releasing things like Prima Facie. Well, I think, was Vanya this year? Was that? It might have been earlier this year.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I think it's so brilliant that audiences across the UK can see these shows. I remember my parents going to see Vanya and being absolutely captivated. I never thought I'd hear my parents, who go to the theatre once every 6 months, say that they loved a solo version of a Chekhov play that they saw in a cinema that was one act and straight through. But here we are. I would actually say that the way that was filmed was more impressive for me than actually the live stage production to some extent, which is probably a bit of a controversial opinion, but I loved it when I saw it in cinemas, and I loved Till the Stars Come Down when I saw that on NT at Home. And I regularly, if I've got a free evening, we'll just sort of whack on NT at Home and see what's playing and
generally on the national stages it feels a lively year. It's ended with Ballet Shoes. It's had a good run. Rufus Norris coming to the end of his artistic directorship, which I'm sure we'll talk about next year, but it's been a lively time.
Number one, I've spoken about it on the podcast before, but actually I want to revisit it now. Brian Watkins's Weather Girl, which is a solo show about a Californian meteorologist covering a series of wildfires that take on this apocalyptic backdrop. So it's almost like someone reporting on the end of the world, played brilliantly by Julia McDermott, almost like in that classic pitter-patter that you get from American meteorologists when they're sort of telling you which storm is about to hit the East Coast or something, in that way that almost is unfazed but almost oblivious to the sheer horror of the reality that she's facing. When I first saw it in early August, what has struck me is that it was kind of at that moment where, weeks after Kamala Harris had announced her presidential bid and taken over from Joe Biden, and it was sort of the midst of that pro-Kamala brat summer optimistic sense that, okay, this could really be the moment that America changes, or at least, has a black female president. Now, having seen the election results, this play feels more relevant than ever, in that you've got all these figures being elected to members of Donald Trump's cabinet that are almost engineered towards climate denial, and having a play that kind of puts the millennial in the millennialism, people who are willing to stare down the apocalypse and just sort of shrug and carry on, feels incredibly timely. It's coming back next year to the Soho Theatre in London, and I would wholeheartedly recommend anyone go and see it, because it really shook me and actually has left me slightly shaken ever since. But it also has this sense of almost like a tinge of hope towards the end. And I think we always have to sort of look for that, even if it feels unexpected. I know you saw it as well.
Well, you made me go and see it, and I was so glad you did, because it did become quite quickly a sensation at the Edinburgh Fringe. And so I had to fight my way in, and they put in some extra late night performances. So I think I saw it at midnight, which is always a challenge in Edinburgh, that you're staying awake. And I agree with you that it was utterly riveting, and that it came from Francesca Moody Productions, which of course shepherded Fleabag through its various incarnations. And I did feel with Weather Girl that it's got the same potential, that it's a small play, it's a capsule of something with incredible impact. And you can imagine it having other lives. So it will obviously have a life at Soho Theatre, and everybody should go and see it. But its resonance and significance make you think that perhaps it could be developed into something bigger and perhaps, telly-based. And you're right that it's really upsetting. I think that there are a few plays that you see in a year that really upset you, and that was definitely one of them, because it's so devastating in the way that it portrays climate breakdown, and yet it does so as a comedy.
Yeah.
And you start off thinking, oh, this is all so funny, and then gradually you realise that you're in the grip of a nightmare. Very, very clever piece.
It's cruel in a way, and it's almost the play that we realise that we have to deserve because of the state of the world we live in, which is quite a sobering thought, that someone that can stare into the face of the nihilistic, violent world that seems to have emerged and find something that is entertaining and, like you say, funny, it feels kind of morbid to some extent.
Yeah, that was a real shock.
So what's in at your number one then?
Well, my number one, oddly again, is a play I haven't reviewed. So my list is full of plays that somehow I've managed not to review, but I've managed to see. It's The Years, which is based on the writings of Annie Arnaud, adapted and directed by Elaine Arbo. And at the Almeida, I've mentioned it before, I know. It's the story of one woman's life told by 5 women actors who play not only her at different stages in her life, but also all the other characters and all the other children who she encounters. It was the most astonishing thing. I went with a friend on a matinee, and I'd slightly dragged her along. She was very reluctant, and we both emerged shell-shocked by lots of things. It made the headlines because apparently a man fainted during a particularly gruesome illegal abortion early on, which was particularly gruesome. But really what it should have made the headlines for was its coruscating emotional honesty and varied view of a life. The thing about Arnaud as a writer is she doesn't settle into one view of herself, or one view of what you should and shouldn't do, or one view of what feminism is. And the play somehow captured that. And Roman Lagara wrote a really interesting piece. She was one of the 5 women. She wrote a fascinating piece this week about how the whole process of it had been different than any other piece of theatre she made, because it was so collective. And she talked in the piece about how the audience became part of the making. And that was what struck me when I saw it. The audience, which was predominantly women, though there were some men, absolutely identified with what was happening on the stage and remembered going through the political changes that are there, but also remembered the feelings that they had had as women, when they'd given birth or when a love affair had gone wrong. And it's a great act of collective memory. And that makes it sound so awful. Again, it's funny and it's lively and it's a terrific night out in the theatre, but there is something very special about it. And luckily for everybody, it's having another life. So it's opening in the West End on January 24th. And I'm really glad of that. Again, I'll go and see it again. And I think if you can go, I think it's one of those pieces of theatre that people will talk about as changing something in ways I can't quite explain. There was a sense of collective endeavour about it, which I love.
Yeah, as you say, a lot of these shows we thankfully can see on stages in 2025.
I know.
Hopefully even more of them than the ones we know about publicly. There might be a few more that nab a transfer. Hopefully something like Natasha, Pierre and the Great Comet, or a show like that. It would be wonderful to see these back, but obviously you can still catch some of them on streaming, or just imagine that you got a chance to see them, because, you know, as we said at the start, it has been a pretty solid year for theatre. I'd say it's not going to go down as one of the most profoundly world-changing years for theatre, but I think we're also watching a theatre community grappling with this post-COVID reality, and with a new government that hasn't really made its position on the arts especially clear, beyond sort of like a general thumbs up, but no additional funding really, apart from in Scotland. So we wait and see kind of what 2025 will bring.
Yeah, and I do agree with that, but I also think that both are our first choices. I think The Years and Weather Girl are impactful pieces that are going to be remembered when people look back on the year. And now we can look ahead to 2025.
Yes.
We'll be back. We've got a Boxing Day special.
Yes, Boxing Day special. And then the 27th of December, we've got another similarly themed, regularly scheduled episode. Then we're going to be looking ahead the week after.
Yeah, the week after. So in the meantime, we can just say, listen to all those episodes. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Happy Christmas. Have the most lovely time, whether you're in a theatre or not. And I hope you have a happy Christmas, Alex.
Yes, and you too. Hopefully you can relax, and now that you've finished your year of reviewing.
Exactly. Feet up.
One more show to go to
One more show to go. Invention of Love. So
yes.
That's my last outing. But yes, happy Christmas to you all. And it's goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton.
And a goodbye from me, Alex Wood. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you can. We're back regularly with new episodes of the WhatsOnStage podcast.